that everybody is doing well this morning. Welcome to the second day of our 54th annual business meeting and conference, Roots, Reparations, and Renewal. Today we have a fabulous panel of well-experienced experts in the field that are going to offer you from their perspective the different ways in which reparations has been approached and embraced in our institutions, in our communities, in our dioceses, in our parishes. So we welcome you again this morning to that experience and thank you very much for being with us. Before we get underway, you know, one of our greatest joys are our children and youth, and I'm going to invite our youth chaplain, the Reverend Marlene Forrest, to come forward and give us an announcement, field trip announcement.
And I'll say, grown folks, don't be jealous, it's okay. But we are going on a field trip, so if you are a youth or a young adult and you are going with us on the field trip, you need to meet us downstairs on the lobby level in the Conway room by 10:30. Make sure you have your backpacks, make sure you have comfortable walking shoes, because we're going to do a little bit of exercise today. I will have snacks and water and all the other accoutrements for you. But if you are going with us, please meet us in the Conway room by 10:30. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marlene. You guys have fun. All right. At this time, we are going to first of all ask if Dr. Hill has arrived. Dr. Hill, we have a special seat for you up front on the panelist stage. But meanwhile, while we were waiting for his arrival, because he did do a session on reparations for our children and youth yesterday, which was very engaging as I understand it. So he is also going to be a panelist for this morning. At this time, I'd like to invite Ms. Ebony Davis to come forward. Perhaps you have heard of the work that Virginia Theological Seminary is doing in the area of reparations. She is a principal party to that work, as well as being our coordinator for the program for today. So, Ebony, we ask you to come forward at this time and open us up for this session. But before you move, let us pray. Gracious God, we are your children, and we thank you so much for the abundance of your grace which we enjoy each and every day. We ask you in this time and place to be present with us, to lead and guide our conversation, to open our minds and transform our hearts, that we have new understanding and new energy and new excitement about the work to which you call us. Bless each of our panelists and speakers this day, as well as we who gather. And help us in all ways, O Lord God, to know that you are with us, and because you are, we cannot fail. In Christ's name do we pray. Amen. 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 Ebony, please.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I have the pleasure of introducing our wonderful panel this morning, and so I'm just going to go through their bios really quickly, and then they will speak to you for a few minutes, and then we'll open up the room for questions. So start taking your notes and get your questions ready, because we're going to have a really wonderful discussion. We are joined this morning by the Reverend Dr. J. Lee Hill, Jr. He is the Missioner for Racial Justice and Healing for the Episcopal Diocese of Virginia. He has also served in ministry since 1999 and is an ordained minister with recognized standing in the Alliance of Baptists and the United Church of Christ. Dr. Daniels is the founder and president of the Institute of Black World 21st Century, a progressive, African-centered, action-oriented resource center dedicated to empowering people of African descent and marginalized communities. As the administrator for the National African American Reparations Committee, IBW has emerged as a leading organization within the U.S. and global reparations movement. Dr. Daniels serves as the convener of NARC. The Reverend Dr. Joseph Thompson, is an Associate Dean of Multicultural Ministries at Virginia Theological Seminary. He helps to ensure that seminarians engage with issues of race, justice, and intercultural awareness as part of their theological education. He was formerly the archivist for the African American Episcopal Historical Collection at PCS as well. Before heading on to seminary, he taught African American Studies at Washington University in St. Louis, and prior to that, he was the director of the John Hope Franklin Center for African American Documentation in the Duke University Libraries. And last but not least, Ms. Anita Roundtree Green is an author and transformational storyteller who believes language leads change. This rooted belief led her to become the co-founder and CEO of Coming Together Virginia, formerly CTTT RVA, the largest affiliate of a national nonprofit committee to racial healing and reparative justice, engaging nearly 4,000 participants each year. Coming Together Virginia facilitates the courageous, clumsy, and often uncomfortable conversation on race. I love that. And the legacy of the American slave trade in the former capital of the Confederacy. So we're going to begin. Okay, we're going to begin, and I would like you to welcome Ms. Green.
Good morning. Good morning. Did y'all see the fireworks last night? Yes. When I see fireworks like that, it makes me think of the work that's in front of us and how explosive it will be and is, how much chaos it brings, and still how beautiful the outcome is when we reach a point of all things, all colors, moving together, presenting themselves in a wonderful prism. So I was filled with that last night and very happy to be here. I'm going to read a little bit to you, mostly because I don't want to forget some of the great things I wanted to say. As Ebony said, I am co-founder and co-CEO of what used to be Coming to the Table RVA being Richmond, Virginia. We have been together as a nonprofit for 3 years, but before then, we started just bringing people together, pretty much pulling them off the street and going to churches and having small meetings in basements for the clumsy yet courageous and very, very uncomfortable sometimes conversation on race. We started out with 8 or 9 people, and now in a calendar year, we have about 4,000 people join us for all kinds of opportunities for exchange. A lot of what we do is in small circles. We use circle process, and we do storytelling, which means that we don't talk about big issues first. We get to know each other. And we don't talk from one race speaking to another. We talk about individual experiences. And in that way, we can get to know each other, we can build relationships, and people can deal with the deep down, rooted, seated ideas and assumptions they have about the race problems that we have in the city. People say, how in the world do you do this work in the former capital of the Confederacy? One thing is I smile a lot. And the other thing is I'm very, very aware that even though we see Richmond, Virginia as the birthplace a lot of times as racism, it's also the home of the abolitionists. People who brought a very, very different energy to the conversation on race. And so we have, as you've heard, we've been fighting the Civil War for hundreds of years. And we will continue to fight it in love now so that we can get to the change that we all want to see. So how did we get here? So in 2017, the Truth Telling Project, Restorative Justice of Oakland Youth and the Fellowship of Reconciliation began thinking about reparations as a way to accomplish racial healing and justice. This work was led by, among others, Dr. David Ragland, who has become a personal friend of mine. And he is known for the Truth Telling Project. He also works with Cobra. And he is very, he's a national voice on reparations. And the reason why we chose this avenue with Dr. Ragland is because we believe in coming to the table and in coming together Virginia, that reparations, although it has to happen on a systemic level, it has to happen on a moral and spiritual level first. So you'll hear me say these words quite often. Reparations are a spiritual practice, not just a transaction. We believe reparations are a national practice of healing spiritual, moral, and material harm. Now more than ever, we need healing, religious, spiritual, and faith communities to help lead and support this work. The National Days of Reparations for Faith-Based, Spiritual, and Ethical-Centered Communities, or what we call Reparation Sundays, serve as a path toward educating and building a culture of repair. Now, when we first started this work, we decided, we would have one Reparation Sunday a year, and that would be great. People would get together, they'd be nice to each other, we would do some great things in the community. No. Okay. So we moved on to having the Reparation Sunday be at least 2 Sundays out of a calendar year. One is in summer, sometimes July, August, and the other one is around Jubilee. One at Juneteenth and one at Jubilee toward December 18th. So every year there are 2 Reparation Sundays. Each day begins with a period of preparation. So you find a partner, someone in your community, or more than likely outside of your community, if you're bringing races together and economic groups together, and talk about the repair that needs to happen. In the summer, we begin in Juneteenth, as I said, and in the latter part of the year, we move to December for the acknowledgement of what was done and also the starting again of what needs to be done in that next calendar year. As I said, reparations are a moral, spiritual practice that opens the door to economic repair on all systemic levels. We at Coming Together Virginia believe reparations is a relational practice of healing spiritual, moral, and material harm. And now more than ever, we need healing religious, spiritual, and faith communities to help lead and support this work. The National Days of Reparations for Faith-Based, Spiritual, and Ethical-Centered Communities, or Reparation Sunday, serve as a path toward educating and building a culture of repair. And this work is essential in the city of Richmond. Most of the work that we do right now is through our relationships with the Presbyterian Church. And people ask me, Denise, are you Presbyterian? No. However, we're very aware that in Richmond, a lot of the descendants of those who were in the House of Burgesses hundreds of years ago, who were the people who decided that we were going to have this system of enslavement and separation, a lot of them transformed into Presbyterians. And the harm is still very visible in the city of Richmond. We have ultra-European or white Presbyterian churches that have no African American or Black members, and they actually came to us wanting to show up differently in the world. So what we do at Coming Together Virginia, We have facilitated conversations, which whoever takes my workshop, we're going to do some of that today, where we have someone who's actually guiding the conversation. There are no rules, but we have a guide to help keep it balanced and to create a safe space. We also have what's called ambassadors. And what ambassadors are usually people of African descent who are walking into predominantly white or European spaces to bring the richness of the story of the community so that for the first time, for a lot of us, we are having an honest conversation together. Now, there are some people who would describe this as simply talk. You're just talking. However, I would debate that we never really talk to each other across the racial divide. We talk at each other, or we think we know. We have all kinds of certitudes in our heads of what we think that person is about and what they're going to say or what they stand for. But it's only when we come together to tell our personal story. And we dig deep in this. We talk about the first time we were othered, or the first time we were looked at as a race, and how that affected us, and how that affect takes us through decision-making and biases that turn into prejudices, usually for the rest of our lives. And at that point, there is no conversation. We think we know, and we really don't. So when it comes to reparations, we don't think about a check first. Yes, I won't mind. When the line starts, I won't be probably one of the first ones in it. But we have already seen in our nation's history, and actually globally, where that money transaction is usually overturned, okay? And I'm sure you're going to hear more about that from these learned gentlemen here. Or money rarely is enough to assuage and assuage the pain that we have felt and lived through in our nation. Reparations is the midpoint between truth and reconciliation. All right, simply put, don't just tell me you're sorry, okay? There is power in an apology. That's why our parents teach us how to do that. But the thing that makes an apology more powerful is the action that comes after it. What can I do now to make this right? How can I take this story of despair and make it into a story of triumph? How can my apology not only change your situation, but change me, change my heart? That's what this work is about. So white privilege is an assumed, perceived, and unearned advantage. We really usually don't use privilege very much in our conversation. It's an advantage, which unjustly separates all of us from our human and civil rights. So let's be clear, again, in the light of that, there is no healing without repair. This movement is calling for the moral evolution of our country, where the people lead. Okay, we are empowering people. We have an opportunity now to move into a transformational season of uncompromising compassion. More than ever, we need to employ a healing response. So, how does an organization like ours combat white supremacy and racism? Well, we like to say we bring love to the fight. Don't get it twisted. This is a fight. However, we see that love is an element that can not be overcome by hate. So we lead with that. In our Richmond chapter, storytelling is a big deal. Sharing stories, we hear our differences, but we also hear our similarities. Commiserate in our failings, encourage each other across the racial divide to grow, seek knowledge, and yes, try again. We mess up when we are talking to each other about race. And we encourage each other by sharing our small victories all the time. So
again, how do we create a culture of repair? Well, there are 4 tenets that we use, or what we used to say, 4 legs of our table. And gentlemen, if I'm talking too long, you tell me to stop. Okay, thank you. All right, I'm toward the end here. But this is important, and this is what we're going to talk about today in the workshop. Truth-telling in history. Is it possible in this country that we can come together and see the same thing, hear the same thing, and talk about the truth? That's the first thing. And that's one thing people want to take out of our schools, or rather, they don't want them in our schools. I'll say it like that. But the truth does what? It sets us free. The second thing is building relationships. It amazes me when I meet my European or American or white brethren, and they say, this is the first conversation I've ever had with a black person. The third thing, is healing wounds. As a trauma-informed care specialist for the state of Virginia, I hear of the wounds that particularly African Americans, I see those wounds, we walk with them, we talk with them, we live with them, and sometimes we don't even know that we're hurting. And I've been able to open my mind and heart and see that how the tragedy of racism has also caused trauma, harm, and injury to my white family, to European Americans who have horrible situations at home. When you live in a situation of cognitive dissonance, where you do one thing and it doesn't make sense, but you've been taught to do it over and over again, you've been taught to hate those people, that affects the way that you think, feel, live, breathe. It affects every part of your body. So we deal with the harm, we deal with the trauma, we deal with the injury. And after you've learned something about the history, after you have met some people across the racial divide, and then after you have healed some wounds, we want you to take an action. We want you to take an action that's comfortable. It could be sharing something that you've learned with somebody in your neighborhood or in your family. Do that as often as you can. But then we want you to do something else. We want you to take an action that's uncomfortable. I'll just one example, and then I'll give up the mic to my friends here. But there was a woman that came to us at the table, and she was able to learn some history, have some conversation with some people across the racial divide. She felt comfortable with that. When she went to work the next day, she sat at a different table at lunchtime. She sat with some black people. And guess what? She didn't die. She actually made some friends. And as that relationship grew, she realized that the ladies that were in that lunch circle with her that were of African descent, they didn't make as much money as she did, although they did the same job. So when her review came up, she decided that she would ask her employer, excuse me, I've met Lisa, I've met Angela, I've met Denise, and I realized that they don't make as much money as I do, even though we have the same job. And guess what happened? She didn't get fired. Those other ladies got raises. Ashe? That's a reparational act. That's when someone has been changed inwardly and can make a decision to move on something outwardly. So that's the work at the table. That's what moral and spiritual repair looks like in Richmond, Virginia. And there is a chapter here in the Baltimore area for those who live here, and I'll be willing to introduce you to the people who run that chapter. Thank you for your listening, and thank you for your time.
Good morning. First, going to set my clock here so I can watch my time, because time does get away from you when you talk about something that is very important to you and very important to the moment. I do want to take a point of personal privilege and just say what a pleasure it is to be at another Union of Black Episcopalians gathering, because it's something that I feel like we maybe took for granted in the pre-COVID times, as we took so many things for granted. And so to come back and have an in-person gathering as the UBE, it is really and truly a blessing. And I do want to thank Reverend Kim and the entire UBE team for being steadfast and making sure that we would get together again in person, and for such a wonderful and purposeful topic. So I just think we need to give them a round of applause. So my name is Joe Thompson. I am Associate Dean of Multicultural Ministries, and I'm also on the faculty at Virginia Theological Seminary. And in that capacity, I happen to be one of the primary architects of our reparations program. Now, I speak about reparations on a fairly regular basis as a result of running that program, I, along with my colleague Ebony Davis, who is our moderator. And one of the questions that I often get when I speak about this is about the theology behind reparations. And I often get that question from European Americans, from people of European descent. And on the one hand, I think, okay, fair enough. It's a fair enough question that we are followers of Jesus Christ and faithful people of other traditions, and so we want to think about the theology, about what Holy Scripture has to say about certain things. But there's another part of me that always thinks, really? It's not that difficult. I seem to recall some things in Scripture about not lying, not stealing, not killing, doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. There's a lot of different ways one can approach this that are not exactly obscure. So, I'm kind of mixed when I hear that question. But it does make me think, as a person of faith, about the theology. But I think about it less about justification, which is what I think is often the question. How do you justify reparations? And I think about it more from the standpoint of the work of reparations. How does theology inform what we actually do in the work of reparations? And so the scriptures that come to my mind have to do with bearing fruit. It has to do with, for example, Matthew 7:20, where Jesus is talking about false prophets, and he says, by their fruits you will know them. And I think about Matthew 3:8, John the Baptist, when the people come out to him and he says, you brood of vipers, how did you know to come out here? If you're going to come out here, bear fruit that is worthy of repentance. And so that is how, as someone who is kind of on this bridge, as an African-American person working at a predominantly historically white institution that is trying to do this work, I think in terms of helping the institution try to bear that kind of a worthy fruit. Now, sometimes it seems to me that that question of what's the theology of reparations, wanting to justify it, it comes from a place of really questioning whether or not Black people really deserve reparations. Not always, but sometimes I think that's where the question is coming from. And so there is one resource that I want to talk to you about for a little bit that I found very helpful in this regard. How many of you have read the book From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century by Darity and Mullen, or have heard of the book. It's an excellent work, and I commend it to you. And when I started the book, I kind of thought that it would primarily be focused on giving, a detailed sort of account of how a reparations program could work in the United States of America. Now, they do that work. They spend, about a chapter or so towards the end of the work talking about what a program of reparations would actually look like from the federal government. But the primary thing that they do in that book is that they spend a lot of time recounting instance after instance after instance where the federal government had the opportunity and considered, federal government and also in some cases I think local and state governments, considered the possibility of doing the right thing and giving some form of recompense to those who had been enslaved or to their descendants, and chose not to. They recount all of the many missed opportunities. They recount all of the many instances where African American communities living in a land that is supposedly dedicated to the rule of law and equality under the law were subject to all kinds of untold violence and robbery and rape and everything else, and there was no real recourse under the law. And many examples come to mind, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Wilmington, North Carolina, Rosewood in Florida, East St. Louis, Illinois, Chicago. I mean, there's all of these instances that many of us can think of. So the brilliant thing about that book is that by the time they get done with you, because most people, I think, in our society come to this question of reparations asking, how in the world could we justify, or why in the world would we give reparations to African Americans? By the time Darity and Mullen are done with you in this book, they've turned that question on its head, and they make you ask, how in the world could a society that is supposedly committed to the ideals of democracy and equality, rule of law, equality under the law, how could such a society not give reparations to a group of people who have repeatedly and consistently been undermined in their pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? That is the shift that they do in this book. And I think it's an incredibly important shift. They shift us from thinking about what Black people deserve to thinking about what justice demands, about looking at the past misdeeds of the nation and what is required of this nation and of its people to stop living in a state of rank hypocrisy, to live in a society where we the people really means all of the people. Because, by the way, these things that are done by governmental entities are done supposedly in our name because we are part of we the people. So in other words, by the time you read that book, you realize that when you come to the topic of reparations, Black people are not the ones on trial. We are this nation has a habit of putting us on trial in figurative ways, in literal ways. But on this topic, we are not the ones who are on trial. It is the nation and its audacious culture of white supremacy that is on trial. So we have to get away from that reflex. So, their work really attempts to take the skepticism off of the Black community and put it where it really belongs. And that is on entities, organizations, governments that are actually saying that they want to do something about reparations. And so I will tell you just a little bit as I talk about Virginia Theological Seminary and what it is that we're up to. hopefully you will get a sense of how it is that we are trying to do this work in a way that bears good fruit. And excuse me, I was making some changes last night, and you know how you do all this scribbling, and now I'm trying to remember what order things actually are in. So, and what page the actual remarks are on. But I found it, so I'm good. So again, thinking of my work, and I don't want to speak for Ebony, but in the conversations that we've had, I think we both share the idea that we're kind of bridge trying to get the organization to bear good fruit. So I'll just tell you a little bit about the program at VTS. And if you want to learn more of the specifics, we'll be talking in the workshops this afternoon, so you could come to hear those. So the VTS program is for both descendants of enslaved persons who labored at VTS, and also for those who whose ancestors worked at VTS as employees during the era of legal segregation. And so basically any black person who worked at VTS from its founding in 1823 up until 1950 when VTS integrated, that is are part of this program. There are many families that are right around the seminary who have ancestors that they know worked at the seminary. I mean, this is, there is a huge community and a long-standing community that is right around Virginia Theological Seminary that is the primary place that we kind of started when we began the work of actually trying to connect with possible descendants. VTS has taken the responsibility to do the historical and the genealogical research to actually find the descendants of enslaved people and also of segregation-era laborers at Virginia Theological Seminary. And I think that's one important piece of the credibility of the program is that, the institution actually has decided to get researchers who really know what they're doing and who've done a lot of this work in the local community, who know also about doing research on slavery, who can really dig deep and figure out the names of persons who worked at the seminary and then try to find descendants. One major goal of the program is to give a fuller account of the seminary's history. And one of the reasons why this came up is that we are coming up on the bicentennial in 2023. And so, the administration wanted to make sure that this time around, as opposed to at the centennial 100 years ago, that a different story is told. Because you can imagine that 100 years ago in 1923, the hagiography that was done, the histories that were done of Virginia Theological Seminary did not talk very much about slavery, did not talk very much about the way that the institution participated in segregation, and because it was still doing it at the time. So obviously it was not really a topic of conversation. But we wanted to make sure that that was different this time around. And so that's a part of the reparations program, is thinking differently about the history, telling the truth, some of the things that so many have, other speakers have talked about. Descendants are eligible. There's a $2.2 million endowment. And I want to give a shout to Father Jamond, who preached last night, and say right up front, no, that is not enough, but given the resources that the seminary has. But that's where we are right now. But there's a $2.2 million endowment. And every year there's a draw taken off of the endowment off of the larger endowment for the operating budget. And we use those same percentages to take a draw off of this reparations endowment. And then descendants are entitled to an annual share of that reparations endowment in perpetuity. And so this is not just a kind of one and done, we're just doing this and moving on to the next thing, but we wanted to ensure that it was seen as a commitment, because it is a commitment, and something that the institution can't just sort of run away from. The endowment is considered a seed that should grow, and we view this really as a trust that is being developed with the descendant community. The process that we use to onboard people into the program is one that is very relational. My colleague Ebony does a lot of the work, meeting with families, showing up and saying, hey, we have this program, and having them be kind of bewildered and having all different kinds of reactions to that. But it's a very in-depth and relational process that we go through. It's not a matter of, you just go to a website or something and fill out a form, but we really want it to be something that is building connection between us and the descendants. There are other aspects of the program, including there are funds that are being set aside for Black congregations that are historically related to the seminary. So for specificity, Meade Memorial Episcopal Church in Old Town Alexandria, and also Oakland Baptist Church, which is right around the corner from the seminary. And so those aspects of the program we're still kind of developing and getting to build relationship with those congregations, but those are other aspects of the program. And there are also some small grants for Black alumni who are working in Black congregations as well. So those are just a few aspects of the program, and I hope you'll come because we're repeating the same session twice in the afternoon, where we'll give more information about the specifics. So in closing, I just want to share that at the beginning of June, we had a gala for reparations descendants who are affiliated with the program so far. We held it in the refectory at VTS. And, we had about 200 descendants come to that program. And I would say, I've been at the seminary for 10 years. It's certainly the largest gathering of people of color I have ever seen at Virginia Theological Seminary, and I'm going to guess it may be the largest in its history. But it was a wonderful evening. We put up on the walls genealogical charts of the different family groupings, and it showed who was the enslaved person or who was the laborer who worked at the seminary, and then traced that as far as it could be traced down to those descendants. The descendants, many of them, it wasn't about the seminary, it was about the descendants. So they spoke about their memories of their family, about their memories of their ancestor. And it was really a sacred and holy event. And it was a privilege to be a part of it. So with that, I'll just say, that's an example of some of the concrete work that we're doing. And the descendants on the whole have been very appreciative of the work that the seminary has done. And it's our pleasure and our privilege to work with this program and with the descendants and that legacy. So thank you very much for your time.
Well, I too want to say good morning to everyone. I know y'all ain't no ways tired. Everybody's feeling energetic and fired up, right? I also just want to quickly join my colleagues and thank and offer my appreciation for this opportunity. It gets gooder and gooder. This morning at breakfast, I got an opportunity to talk to some other folks I had worked with 20 years ago, 30 years ago, all these intersections that are coming together. And all of them are really around the work of the Union of Black Episcopalians and the work that you've done. And I continue to stress the importance of excavating and telling the story of those roots. They are important to all of us in Black America. So I just want to quickly shout that out. Also quickly is to the Truth Telling Project. Dr. David Ragland. We've worked together, and we have a cohort that we're all a part of. And actually, was at one of the major convenings a few years ago back in Ferguson as we came together. And to say that's important work. I think we have to categorize it within the context of what we call anti-racist training. We have to have folks who carve out that lane. All of us don't have the tolerance for that lane. I don't have a lot of tolerance for that lane. I can remember years ago in Youngstown, Ohio, going around speaking. I went to my counter. I had been to like X numbers of meetings trying to persuade white folks of the veracity of our cause. And so we need people who can really be expert at that. The People's Institute, some of you know the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond are some of the best at it. Because I do believe if there are some white folks who, if they knew better, they would do better. But white supremacy is deeply embedded in this nation. And it has been used by the power structure over and over again as a strategy to divide and exploit. I was deputy campaign manager for the Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson, one of the great crusades, the campaigns in 1984 and 1988. He used to often talk about the fact, and we still do today, why is it that white folks vote against their own interest? Their own interest. That's because white racism, white supremacy is deep, and also white skin privilege is very deep. So we really appreciate the work of the Truth Telling Project, the patience that's involved in getting some white allies, because we need white allies. I'll talk about that a bit in a moment. What I really want to do quickly is do some basics, because I'm eager and I've been listening and learning and taking in information. So I just want to do some basics real quick. I don't want to take for granted that we know what the definition of reparations is. I won't give you a comprehensive one, but I'll give you a basic one. The reparations is about repair. That's the root word, is repair. Repair for what? It is for the physical domination, destruction of a people, but much more than that. It is also for the cultural, mental, spiritual, and even the question of identity. All of those are due repair under not just Ron Daniels say, but international law say that be a part of the definition. And we need to be very clear about that. Because identity is a key question for we as African people. Malcolm X said that of all of the crimes committed against Africans, by Europeans against Africans, he said the greatest was to take our names. The destruction of culture, or the attempt to destroy culture. The attempt to this. In fact, in this country, we have been more than any other group of Africans in the hemisphere. Brutality, yes, but no other group was suffered what cultural aggression to the degree that we did. That's why we had to struggle to go from African Methodist Episcopal Church to being coloreds, and even today, we're talking about a room for the black people, but we say colored people, when we really mean black people and African people. We still struggle with that to some degree. And so it becomes important that when a crime is committed, and indeed the transatlantic slave trade or the European slave trade was a crime against humanity, over which there is no statute of limitations, the process requires acknowledgement. Number one, you must acknowledge. And then you must apologize. And as was previously said, apologies is not enough. Can't just steal something from me and then say, I'm sorry. We need to replace the car or do something along those lines. All right? And we have to deal with repair. And that repair is defined, again, under international law as restitution, compensation. And it might take many, many forms. Direct benefits. People often talk about the check. We talked about the check yesterday, but again, I would refer you to the 10-point program. Read that 10-point program. Because there's no amount of money ever that could be enough to pay for the Holocaust of enslavement. This is the greatest crime against humanity ever over years. Concentrated period, of course, what happened to the Jews in Nazi Germany. 6 million There's 6 million others who don't get mentioned. It was really 12 million, because Hitler was trying to eliminate the Jews and all people he saw as non-conformant and all kinds of things. But over a long period of time, we don't even know the numbers. At least 30, 40 million, at least, taken out of the African continent. So this is crime against humanity. And so no amount of money can pay for that. But you can have direct benefits. Tulsa is an example. The 3 surviving descendants of Tulsa, all over 100 years old, they've never been paid. They are entitled to compensation. Unfortunately, the state has never paid that compensation. The corporations have come forward now to give them some satisfaction. But the issue becomes, imagine, if you will, the question of community, which our sisters talked about yesterday. How do you repair and bring back Greenwood? How do you bring back neighborhoods? So repair just can't just be just direct payments. It has to be holistic, communal and collective in terms of structures and institutions that have to be rebuilt. And so we need to imagine it along those lines. And also the international law talks about non-repetition. Non-repetition, doing things so it will not ever happen again. That's why the term reparative becomes important. Because at the end of the day, reparations is really radical at the sense of saying that we want to create a value system so that this will never, ever happen again, not only to us, but anyone. Coming out of the ancient Kemetic concept of ma'at, of justice and righteousness. So we just don't want to get a check and get a payment, and this we go somewhere, we go around, and then we replicate Clarence Thomas. Because all skin folks ain't kin folks. But what does that really mean? It means that it really is deeper than skin color. We're talking about a system of values. Values defines blackness, not just the skin color, it's values that we're propagating and we're talking about. So non-repetition becomes a part of that. And then finally, reconciliation. Reconciliation is not only possible, it is an aspiration. But it comes at the end. There's some people who want to make reconciliation the first thing. I'm sorry, I apologize, let's reconcile. No. It is a process, and it's not an easy process. People talk about the work of Martin Luther King, and they glorify it and talk about how one, but it was even from the concept of Gandhi. It was soul force, it is creative tension. It's not a process that is without tension. Hate's not involved, it's love, but it's not touchy-feely, mushy love either. It's love for justice and righteousness, played out in ways that are nonviolent, if you will. And so, and I say that because there are a lot of people who, we looked at South Africa, and y'all all know how it is. There are a lot of people who just love to see, and they talk about how black people absorb pain. We saw what happened in South Carolina, and people were saying, oh, gee, look how easily black people just forgive. And they somehow expect us to just forgive. But quite frankly, that forgiving is not good in that sense, because that means we are internalizing the pain and the trauma. And it's passed on from generation to generation. And what does that mean? In some ways, the irrational behavior we see now has been passed on from generation to generation to generation. I have a son who lives in Akron, Ohio. I happened to look at the news the other day. A woman named Hill from Akron was NAACP was saying, she said, I am still feeling the pain from Rodney King. We all feel that pain. We don't talk about it, which is a bad thing. But we internalize it. That trauma is a part of, indeed, reparations as well. Now let me quickly do another series of things I want to talk about. Criteria becomes very important. Part of that was discussed, our previous speaker, in talking about the Virginia Theological Seminary. There's some people say, I apologize, I acknowledge all that thing, and here I want to give you some scholarships. I want to give you some checks. No, you cannot give us anything. The person, by definition criteria, who or our institution that afflicts the injury cannot define the remedy. The remedy has to be defined by whom? The persons who have suffered the harm. That is axiomatic. And that becomes important even as we work with community people, because we are so used to being in the house that sometimes we will acquiesce just because somebody decided they wanted to do something nice. That is not sufficient, so we need to orient our people along those lines. The other thing is that today there's some very good stuff happening because of the movement, including the movement being spearheaded by the Episcopal Church under the leadership of Bishop Curry, driven by the Union of Black Episcopalians. Equity policies all over the place now. But equity policy is admirable, but it is not reparations. Equity policy is that for that which it puts a lens on that says that these discussions of disparity will not take place now, henceforth, and forevermore. It does not account for the accumulated harms of the past. So therefore, it's good. Let's encourage it, but let's not mistake it for reparations. Other thing is we must not also mistake it for ordinary public policy. I mean, there's some stuff happening right now the government needs to be taken care of. We pay taxes. We need jobs now. We need housing now. We need all those things right now. So let's not take a good jobs program and slap reparations on top of it and say we got our reparations. No, that's just what the government ought to be doing right now. Ordinary public policy. So I want to clarify these things so as we move forward, we're not sort of lunging forward and mistakenly putting the name reparations on things that are not really reparations. Not because we're trying to have a privileged thing, it's because the essence of something becomes important. Now quickly, let me just talk about some of the bottom-up things that we'll talk in more depth about this afternoon. Because we talked yesterday about H.R. 40. I don't want to repeat that. We're on the brink of pushing that over the top. And when we get this powerful prayer vigil together, led by the Episcopal folk, multiracial, interdenominational, ecumenical, it's going to happen. We claim the victory, all right? So we're going to get that. We're going to get that. So what's happening around the country is there are local reparations taking place. Evanston, Illinois is an example of local reparations, but there are also, and we work on this in the National African American Reparations Commission, but we work on municipalities and cities, talk about that quickly in a minute. But corporations also have to be called to task. We also have colleges and universities that have to be called to task. And they are being called to task. Now, of course, Georgetown University law school came forward, and they kind of, stumbled around and fumbled around, and, we do mean it, we will do it, and the students had to get on them and all that, but they made a halting effort, and it's being, and the descendants are organizing to help correct it and make it right, if you will. Harvard University just came out with $100 million, which sounds like a lot, but really ain't a lot, but $100 million. Other universities are following suit. Why? Because they benefited. They benefited from enslavement. And so they are also due. Evanston, Illinois is an example of, definitionally, when we talk about reparations, reparations is for enslavement, yes. But we have to be absolutely clear that reparations is for far more than just enslavement. I mean, this is one of the original sins that is horrific and so forth, but it is all of the legacies. And our sister cited them yesterday, and we don't forget that. The Homestead Act, FHA, the GI Bill. We were excluded deliberately from these. Ta-Nehisi Coates, the brilliant brother who wrote the article in Atlantic, was not a believer in reparations. He didn't study enslavement. He went to Chicago and he studied what? Redlining. And when he studied, he said, oh my God, I didn't realize. He said, this is terrible because our communities have been destroyed, ripped up by gentrification, urban renewal, the Negro removal of the 20th century. All these programs that you know about that broke up and destroyed prosperous business. Tulsa is one thing. We also had prosperous business community just ripped up because they just, the highway just run up, right up through our community. That was not by accident. That was deliberately done. And reparations are due for that. Evanston, Illinois, for example, the first payments are not around enslavement, they're around redlining. We were right there. We saw the documented evidence of where they said, we're going to move the black people from here on the riverside, and we're going to put them over here. Right there on the record. $10 million program over 10 years, just like you were saying in Virginia, that's not, people say, oh, that's not reparations. Well, the amount ain't got nothing to do with whether it's reparations or not. We want much more, but it's reparations. It is a beginning. It's something to build on. And so we have colleges and universities, we have and also families are due. Now let me say quickly about Evanston. Evanston is one of the most exciting because we're building a resource center in Evanston. There are cities and municipalities all over the country now building local municipal reparations programs. All over the country, hundreds of cities are now coming. Asheville, North Carolina, the college town up in Massachusetts, Amherst is coming on. Boston, Massachusetts, Detroit, San Francisco. All over the country, we find cities coming on board, building out, and you should be a part of that movement, being connected. And you can do that again. Just stay on board, ibw21.org, or you can also do reparationscom2ms.org, and you go right into all of that, so you know where to find us, if you will. Finally, I just want to say a word about a couple of other initiatives that we're working on with NARC. Speak more about them in the afternoon. Elaine, Arkansas. Elaine, Arkansas, many of you know the Bloody Red Summer of 1919. Someone mentioned this the other day about the flag. I mean, I went and, don't get me started. Because we are America's most patient patriots. I don't want nobody lecturing me about whether I should or should not stand up for the flag. What are you talking about? We fought in every war. Bled. Doc Rivers, the coach of the Philadelphia 76ers, I like a little basketball. He said, we keep loving America, but America won't love us back. Now, it's not quite that. That's hyperbole to some degree. But he's saying that, look, after all we've done, Medgar Evers, shotgun down in his driveway in Mississippi. He was a veteran, fought in every war. And yet, we still don't have reparations. We still don't have the full benefits of equity and inclusion as we should. Elaine, Arkansas is one of those places. Thousands, as many people were slaughtered and killed in Elaine, Arkansas as happened in Tulsa. And some of them were prosperous owners as well. So just Google Elaine, Arkansas. In Atlanta, Georgia, I was sharing this morning, convict lease labor, Chattahoochee Brick Company in Atlanta, Georgia. Some of you know Douglas Blackman's milestone work, Slavery by Another Name, talking about convict lease labor. But I did not, even though I teach it, was not aware of the degree of it. Atlanta, Georgia, convict Chattahoochee Brick Company, they ground up black people on that property. The bones died on the property. Millions and millions and millions of dollars made off of the free labor of black folks. Mayor English made so much money they had to open up a bank because of so much wealth being extracted from our people. Today, the lineage of that is Wells Fargo off of the Chattahoochee Brick Company. And we're fighting. In fact, we're winning that struggle. The land has now been turned over. We're getting ready to convert it into a memorial park and all that. The people had to fight around that. But the issue is convict lease labor. And what we discovered is in the southern part of the United States, well into the 30s, about half of the budgets of these southern states was coming off of what? Convict lease labor extracted from black people. So just wanted to let you know about that. And finally, Brother VP is here. We're working to get something going in New Orleans. They already started in New Orleans, and we're trying to deal with it a little bit because New Orleans is like a gateway. I mean, there's a whole lot to be excavated in New Orleans, and Brother VP Franklin is working on that. I want to close by talking about white allies. We need white allies. I'm sending you for another piece of research. The Fund for Reparations Now. Fund for Reparations Now. Because we need allies who will function as white allies. Now, sometimes, white folks wake up and they with you, but then they want to be with you and then they want to lead you too. Now, and by the way, it's when you've been in charge so long, it's kind of hard not to be one. You know what I'm saying? It's in your bones, so to speak. What did Frederick Douglass said? Too long have others spoken for us. I love you, Garrison. I'm with you, but you can't speak for us. We have to speak for ourselves. We can be allies, but our allies need to follow us, not lead us. And so we were fortunate, blessed. Black Lives Matter, LA, someone contacted us, young man named David Gardner. We get a lot of these requests. We want to do some work with NARC on the 10-point program and all of this. Here come some more white folks. But we researched them. And we found out that they were allied with Black Lives Matter, LA, and they were doing anti-racist work. They were not famous people. And this small group of anti-racist white folks, the Fund for Reparations Now, said, we want to embrace the 10-point program. We want to do reparations now while you're fighting for the federal reparations. And we said, okay, what about when you go to the point, you'll see point 9 is about sacred sites. Sacred sites is about memory. Those grave sites all over the country where our folk are buried what the weeds are coming out. Right? And we said, okay. And then we sent them to Elaine, Arkansas. And they connected with Elaine, Arkansas. And then people said, we need some help. These anti-racist white folks with no staff and nothing going for them raised $150,000 and dedicated it to the Elaine Legacy Center with the descendants. And then just recently we went out I had never been to Elaine, Arkansas to meet with the people and the descendants there, and they were very happy about it. They're rebuilding a centerpiece of the community. And by the way, many of you know Native Son, you know Black Boy, you know Richard Wright. Well, Richard Wright's uncle was lynched in Elaine, Arkansas. And his daughter still lives. Julia Wright is still a part of this process. That's another part of the angle. So we went out to be on site with them, and they said, well, we thank you and we appreciate it. And then we got a note from them saying, we need to finish this centerpiece, this drugstore that was the heart of the black community. And the Fund for Reparations Now just recently said, okay, we'll do it. They just contributed another $150,000 to rebuild that center in Elaine, Arkansas. And I'm checking my phone today. These white folks is raising money every day. But here's the point. They don't move without coming to us respectfully and saying, what do you think? Is this the way we should do it? What's your advice? So much so now we trust them. We say, go do what you got to do, because we know they're authentic. They are not trying to lead us. They are about being true white allies, which putting their resources and their time at our disposal. And I say that because some of you are going to be finding that out there. We're trying to create a legitimate lane, because we also got some people out here, and you can do what you want to do. I mean, some folks black folks they'll guilt tripping white folks and have them pay their electric bill and their car notes. I ain't hating on them. I'm not gonna hate on them, but there is a lane where you can come and find credible allies. So anyway, thank you very much. I just wanted to lay out some of those basic things as we get ready for this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is J. Lee Hill, Jr., and I serve as the Missioner for Racial Justice and Healing in the Diocese of Virginia. It is a brand new position that has been recently created, and as one of the elders in the community at St. Mary's in Berryville, in Berryville, Virginia, reminded me or told me, you are the first person of color that has sat in an office at the Diocese of Virginia. And so I come to this work bearing the weight and the responsibility of those who have been before me, who have struggled, those who have labored in so many different ways to bring about the work of racial justice and reparations in the Diocese of Virginia. And so I want to share just a bit about some of my kind of on-the-ground perspectives and on-the-ground work that has happened, and the kind of orientation that I bring to this work. First, a bit about my own sense of grounding in this. Several years ago, an elder in the community where I previously served as a pastor in the United Church of Christ in San Diego, small black UCC church there, an elder in the community gifted me a Sankofa. And she came to my door and she presented it to me and she said to me, I want you to hold this and to keep it and to look at it. And so the meaning and the work of the Sankofa, the bird with its head facing in one direction, moving in that direction, carrying within its beak the wisdom of the past, grounds my work. I keep the Sankofa close to me, and I remind folks every time I gather with them of its meaning, of its power, and of its influence in the work that we are called to do. Reminding us to hold on to the wisdom of the past, even as we move into this new and different and daring future. And so I think of my work in this way as being called to work with the entire diocesan family in Virginia to really speak truth to power and to work with God in this work of co-creating a world that will end white supremacy, racism, and colonialism. And what I have found is that it's easy to encourage church folk to look outside at what's happening in the world and to see where all of this is evident. But it's real hard to hold the mirror up to the church, to hold the mirror up to the diocese itself, and to begin to examine all of the ways in which white supremacy and elitism and exceptionalism makes itself known in the daily life of the church. And so we are called in this way to push and to challenge and to speak truth to power, even if it means, and especially I think when it means, speaking truth to ourselves. And so as said before, we have to tell the story, but not just the story in part, not just the story in footnotes and appendices, but we have to tell the whole story, centering in particularly those folks who have been marginalized and oppressed. A word about imagination. I talk a lot about imagination because I think it is critically important for us to dream the world that we want to live in and then go out and be that which we have dreamt of. I think that if the goal of our theological enterprise is to create these healthy spaces where we are to encounter God and to encounter one another, then that fertile soil of imagination has to be cultivated, has to be tended, has to be managed, it has to be poured into. And it demands that we return again and again, I think, to the advice that Jesus gave to the crowd of those who gathered to listening to him preaching, to have this kind of childlike faith, to have a sense of wonder and amazement and astonishment at what God is able to do. And just as children are encouraged in their formative years to make full use of their imaginations, to play and to wonder and to explore hidden worlds within, to lose sight of what is around them and all of the logic that has ordered the way in which we live, I think, too, we must do this work. So I have a 7-year-old son. His name is Jay Lee III. And Jay Lee, we were getting ready to go down to Williamsburg. And I wanted them to go to Williamsburg and to see Jamestown and to have some context around what they had already learned in school, because I was going to give them a different history lesson. I had my plan, was ready to leave, got my older son, Hezekiah, together. Jay Lee was at the edge of the bed playing with his Legos. And I kept saying, Jay Lee, we got to go, buddy. We've got to get on the road because we don't want to run into traffic. We've got all of these things to do. Jay Lee was lost in his world. Completely lost in his world. And while I had my own structure and form and thing that I wanted to do, Jay Lee was there in his world. Cars were moving, building. I mean, it was just a few Legos, y'all, but there was big Legos in his mind, and cars were leaping over. All of this was happening in his world, and I was in mine. And suddenly, when I stopped long enough to look into his world, I started to get a little curious. I wanted to know what he was building and how it was being sustained and why. We have to have that kind of space for ourselves in order to imagine something different, a world that is different. And my work in this is helping white folks to imagine a world that is different, a world that is brighter, a world that is full, a world that centers people of color and makes their realities real in the world. Jürgen Moltmann, systematic theologian, talks a lot about this and basically offers this. He says that we cannot live, it basically says that that what we refuse to believe, we also refuse to imagine. And so we have to imagine this world. Judy Fentress-Williams also talks a lot about this imagination stuff as well. We have to return again and again, I think, to this kind of imaginative hope, that which King talked about and Prathia Hall gave some hope around. Thirdly now, a word about young people. So just on yesterday, I was with Reverend Marlene with our young people that are here at UBE and had this wonderful encounter with our young people in talking about reparations and grounding and the work of renewal and teaching and sharing with them the basics of what we all know. What is the root of reparations? It is repair. What does this mean for young people? How do they think about repair? How do they think about renewal? And friends, if we are not partnering with young people today to imagine this world for tomorrow, then the world that we are imagining is a world that young people will not want to live in. We must find young folks and cajole them and persuade them and encourage them to journey with us as we dream out this future with bright hope and possibility. Really, it was young people that were on the front lines that pushed all of this work forward. And we the church came running behind the young folks. We must embrace, welcome, celebrate, and even allow ourselves to be led by them. And finally, a word about the practical realities of this living hope of reparations. I have the joy and privilege of being able to travel throughout our very large diocese and spend time preaching and teaching and having conversations with largely white folks about reparations and racial justice. And what happens again and again and again and again and again is that I will start preaching and I get a little Baptist on them a little bit, get a little Baptist. And I'll start preaching and all of a sudden I'll start talking about white superiority. And I'll start naming white exceptionalism. And heads will drop and folks will lean back. And few will be courageous enough after the service to come to me and to say, as some I hope and more I hope will do, Dr. Hill, I was with you until you said. But friends, that's okay. Because there is a courageous moment in being able to name exactly where they are. I would rather for them to stand at the door and tell me I was with you until, because it gives me an opportunity to engage them further in, well, tell me, what about white exceptionalism disturbs you? Let's talk about that for just a moment. Let's really think about that this week. How about I come back and we have coffee so that we can begin to. This is also the work of reparations. Not just about a check, but about the transformation of heart and mind. And that begins for the church right there in the pew. There's a congregation in Rixieville, in Virginia, Little Fork Episcopal Church. Historic church, little small church out in the middle of nowhere, really. In the front of their building, there is a Confederate monument to the Little Fork Rangers. The congregation invited me to come out and to journey with them in their conversations about this memorial. What would they do? Would they get rid of it? Would they go and dump it on the side of the road, as someone did suggest? Would they move it to their graveyard, right? Would they move it there and allow it to be there? Would they cut off the part that has references to the Confederacy and leave the memorial to those members of the community or families of the community of the deceased? What would they do with this? I invited them to dream, to imagine something else, to imagine people of color who are moving into the community, coming up to the front of the door of the church and seeing, before they can even see their radical welcome and hospitality and love and joy of Jesus, to see what it might be to see that memorial and be shocked, differently oriented. They walked that journey and have now come to this place of naming the enslaved who built the building, of being able to honor the presence of African folks who are not yet there physically, but are all around the building keeping that thing up. It took space and time to imagine something new, to imagine something different, to be led into that space of openness. In our workshop this evening, you'll hear some more of these kinds of practical realities of what this work looks like on the ground. I'll be joined with colleagues from church here in Baltimore who will be sharing also in their work. But I'll also be sharing more of these kinds of stories and ways that we are approaching this work in Virginia. We have developed just last November at our annual convention, a resolution was passed to begin the work of reparations in the Diocese of Virginia. A $10 million investment fund was attached to that. And as Father Jamon said to us yesterday, it makes me go back and try to figure out, well, what is the penny on this, right? How much is this, really, in our entire diocesan budget, right? But that work is beginning. And part of our work in beginning this is being able to set aside a task force that has been put together now, largely people of color on this task force, because we have to be at the table helping to make decisions. And so I'm excited about that beginning and about the work that is yet ahead, and also really sobered by that work as well. The last thing that I will say is I'm a Gen Xer. I'm young. I'm young, yeah. I'm born in the late 70s. I'm a baby to all of y'all, yeah. And one of the things that keeps coming to mind for me is my own impatience in this work, and yet the need to be patient. My grandmother, I was born and raised in Virginia. My grandmother in Bermuda Hundreds, this little historic community down by the James River, during the summers, Grandma Ruth would get a bowl and get some eggs and some cream and some sugar and some half and half, and she'd start mixing that thing up. Granddaddy would run to the corner store up the road and pick up ice and rock salt. And Grandma would then take that mixture and pour it in this little cylinder thing. Granddaddy would get the big wooden barrel thing and fill it around with ice and put rock salt in the middle, at the bottom, in the middle, and on the top. And Grandma would go underneath that tree, and we would all spend our time cranking that thing.
That's right.
Man, we wanted that ice cream so bad. We wanted that ice cream so bad. And Grandma would sometimes let us get some early, but if you got it too early, it won't nothing but soup. But if you were patient and diligent to the work of cranking that thing, by the time the hot of the day had gone, you had some good homemade ice cream to cool you off. My prayer for us all within this work is that we are diligent to that task of cranking out the work. And may God be pleased and bless all of our efforts.
Can we give everybody another hand? That was amazing. Thank you so much. Is there a mic for the audience that we can use to pass around? They can come here? Okay. So if you have questions, I'm going to invite you to, I guess, line up here. Would that be okay with the camera? Line up here if you have questions for our panelists. But I will start us off. And we'll go down the line from you, Joe, this way. In your work so far, what has been the response of your intended recipients, the communities that you work with, and how has that response correlated or clashed with that of your institution? So with you, Joe, with the descendant community, how has that response correlated or clashed with, I guess you would say, student, staff, faculty, board at the seminary?
And what was the first part of the question again?
The response of your community, how have they received the work you're doing, and how is your institution receiving the work you're doing, and where does that?
Thank you. I alluded to this a little bit in my presentation, that so far, and Ebony could answer this question just as well as I could. It was ironic that you're asking the question. But so far, I think the work of the seminary and the descendant community has been received positively. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that our focus has been on the history, it's been on the ancestors, it's been on lifting up narratives and stories that have not necessarily been told at the seminary. You know, the families obviously had some of the stories. Some of the stories have been kind of unearthed by the researchers. But I think when I look at the gala that I mentioned that we had, you know, it was wonderful to see people going around and touching the different genealogical charts and, you know, kind of adding information. If there were things that were not quite right, or if they had gaps of information, they could put, you know, some names or put some, last names if we only had a first name or that kind of a thing. So I think it has been a very engaged response. And there have been any number of individuals who are kind of the linchpin in a family when we're reaching out to a particular family. And there's that one person, that auntie, that uncle who knows everybody and knows everybody's situation and is helping us to connect with the family, broadly speaking. So that shows, I think, a real engagement. And in terms of how that fits with what the institution had planned, I think I think we had that in mind as we went into this, that we wanted to, as Dr. Hill said, there to be some spaciousness in the program, that it was not just something that the seminary was coming and saying, okay, this is what this is going to look like and this is what we're going to do and so on and so forth, but it would be a chance for the descendants to engage with something that was really important to them, which was telling and lifting up the stories of their ancestors in a place where they had been dishonored, but lifting up those names now in a place of honor at the seminary. And so, again, on that evening, one of the things that people commented about was being in a space that, and in a kind of event that their ancestor would never have been able to participate in at the seminary. That is a kind of psychological and spiritual recompense and healing that the program is beginning to accomplish.
I think I'm going to respond both quickly at the national level. There's this tremendous surge that has ripened, and so we have lots of new people now who are engaged, and we have lots of new people who really, in some respects, need guidance in terms of what has been, and even as we reach the people to give their contribution to what it should be. For example, the movement for Black Lives Matter had made some really significant contributions as young people committed to this cause in making sure that we get it all. By that I mean, they have this concept of looking at all of the systems that have harmed us and making sure that all of them, are engaged in the repair process in a way that some of us may not have initially imagined that process moving forward. I think there are, but there's also issues which have emerged, and some of you are aware of this, about the check. This is something that comes up all the time at the local level, because some people just automatically look at it as a check. And so we, as we said before, are not trying to disparage that notion, but trying to put it in its proper context. But to some people, there's an ideological strand developing that has that as a part of its mission, that it has to be a check. And if it's not a check, it's really not reparations. The other issue that has emerged is the issue of lineage. And I meant to address that a little bit more in the discussion. So when I was teasing out the notion of reparations being for enslavement, but much more, it is because there are some who have wanted to define reparations for just a limited group of people. And that limited group of people are those who were in the enslavement era ending in 1865. And that would be like the end of it. And we're saying, well, we don't want to leave anything on the table. And so we say, yes, that is important, but we traced out all the other things. I won't repeat all of the other areas for which repair is or reparations are due. But this has become a very serious debate, because there's a notion of creating sort of a descendants of African slaves ethnic group. And there's some veracity to that, because we come from different ethnic groups and we forged a new community in this country. But when you really look at how slavery unfolded, it's very difficult to determine lineage in regard to, like, when did someone get dropped off? Where did they get dropped off? And who are their descendants? And so we say that, we're not going to deny Harry Belafonte, are we? Are we going to, because he came from the Caribbean, or Shirley Chisholm, or Kwame Ture, or Kamala Harris, or people like Abner Louima, because it's also the current situation in relationship to police terror. Nobody asked him whether he was from Haiti or not, or Amadou Diallo, whether he was from Guinea or not. I mean, so it's an argument that we are attempting to get people to understand is not a valid argument in relationship to all of the reparations that are due to us as African people. So that is a debate that is raging. And I have to say, in all honesty, it is a nativist anti-immigration argument that's emerging too. Because in the black community, some of you know this, people say, well, all them Caribbeans coming and take all our jobs, and they said the Africans are taking our jobs, and we got all of that going on. And it's been documented that some of that is coming from right-wing sponsored organizations who are actually deliberately pushing that line to divide the black community and say that we should not vote unless things go a certain way. So I can say that in this audience because many of you, it's hard to say that in the community because people don't quite understand it. The danger is people who are just joining the movement will say, well, wait, that makes sense to me. I just want my check. Why should they get a check and I don't get a check? But you need to be aware of that because that is a raging debate that we are taking on in the community.
Wow, that was a lot. So I'm going to ask my sister to repeat the question because I think I'm going to answer it a little differently.
Okay. What has been the response of your intended recipient group?
Mm-hmm.
And how does that response correlate or clash with your institutions?
Okay. So I'm going to speak to the community first because I know everybody's looking at my pretty black self and probably thinking that I work a lot with African American and black people, and I don't. Most of the community that we work with, that I work with as founder in Coming to the Table and Coming Together Virginia, our organization with 4,000 members is 78% European white people. And I think that's important to mention because these are folks who are coming to black-led organizations like mine, wanting to be a part of the change, but also to heal from where they were. They're coming with a lot of pain. So as my astute colleagues up here mentioned, they listen to our voice, they listen to my voice, they listen to my staff, they listen to other members of Coming to the Table who are all of African American descent. And we decide what changes can be made in the communities, or we send them directly to people who are doing the work in the community of African American descent. As I think you mentioned before, Ron, that one thing that happens nationally in our organization is that our white family gets together and they raise the money for the change that we want to see, and they don't decide how that change looks. We are the folks who do that, and our biggest challenge has been bringing actually more African American, more black people into the conversations with white people. And that's because we carry so much pain. The beauty of what we do is that we do work with so many folks in Virginia that are direct descendants from enslavers. And so they know inherently that a money exchange or transaction has to happen. But what we're able to bring to them literally is the opportunity for a spiritual and moral repair on both sides of that divide. And we do need to bring more young people in the conversation. I just wanted to mention that too, because our organization is overwhelmingly over 50. Because, I mean, you get to a point where that's where the pain is so intolerable that you have to let it go. But what we are doing now is seeding what will happen in generations to come. So we work very diligently with universities, at Virginia Union, where we are in Richmond, with VCU, with the University of Richmond, which is what in the past had been one of the most racist institutions in our city. But now we've been able to seed a youth group there who is doing phenomenal work. So I hope that addressed some of what you were asking.
I want to speak to the curriculum offering that we have in the Episcopal Church of Sacred Ground and what we have experienced in Virginia and the phenomenal work of We Bless You that UBE has done in encouraging Sacred Ground to Sacred Ground circles to form in congregations as well as across the diocese. And that is, I've been really surprised at the level of energy that white folks in particular have to be a part of that curriculum and that program. To do that work of sitting in circle and learning and challenging and growing their own head and heart knowledge is what I think. And the work that happens after that 11-week now curriculum of how do we now place all of this into some kind of practical lived experience. I have challenged folks to become more evangelical in their growing. By this I mean, it is wonderful for you to journey through sacred ground, and I have great hope and expectation that you will. It is troubling for me when you tell me you've done sacred ground 4 times. Or that you are not interested yet in being a facilitator of a group. And this is where I think that the growth has to happen, right? That it has to be some work that happens in you and you have to ingest it and get it and understand it and then take it into your own circles, right? And begin to have that work transform heart and mind with folks that you know so that others can have similar experience. This is the work of evangelism, right? This kind of multiplying and sharing and growing so that we are not just repeat learners over and over again, but that we are doing the work of changing community and empowering community. And I think that the Diocese of Virginia has been extraordinarily supportive of creative ways of doing this, of providing resource for it. And I've not been surprised by that because as I came on board, I was assured that kind of support would be present, and it has been. And so I've been excited and encouraged by that.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience? Okay, I'm gonna go with my next one then. So this, I'm turning this on you all personally now. All of us are Black people doing reparations work for communities that are that we are a part of, but maybe not intimately a part of. But we also have our own trauma and our own intimate communities that need repair. So what is your process, or how do you manage and care for yourself in doing this work for others when you also need the work done for you?
Canon Spellers writes in her work, Church Cracked Open, that this is spiritual work and reminds us of that deep grounding. And so for me, that looks like maintaining a serious contemplative practice. I have a small group that I meet with on a monthly basis to talk about where I am, how I am feeling, the kinds of joys as well as the frustrations that are real and alive, not just in the work, but also in me. And so I encourage folks to maintain a serious spiritual practice. If that is meeting with group, if that's having a spiritual director, if that's engaging in creation care, being out and walking and praying and thinking and doing that time of recreation, it is absolutely necessary in order to continue and be sustained for the long haul of the work that is ahead. And so that's one of the methods that I maintain.
It's a very personal question, so I'm going to give you a very personal answer. I talked with my mother, who transitioned almost 28 years ago, and we talk daily. And I have a sisterhood. We call ourselves the Sisterhood of the Divine Feminine. And most of them are very learned women from clergy, which I am not, but I just literally bathe in their wisdom. And I reflect quite often on what brought me to this work and what keeps me in this work. Very proud to say that I'm a child of the Civil Rights Movement. I was born during that time. I remember coming up in the neighborhood that was redlined. I remember when they built the highway and separated me from the city of Richmond and the church, where I was taught to worship as a young person, and the grocery stores and the black-owned businesses. I remember that just like it was yesterday. I remember I was also, of course, at the age where we were the generation that was put on the front line, I say, as civil rights workers, when we integrated the schools in Richmond, Virginia. And I did that all through elementary, middle, and high school, where I learned the benefit of prayer, because there were some really hard days then. I remember very well when the University of Virginia decided we need to get more black people in here. Mm-hmm. So they sent folks early on to work with us to get ready for that situation. I'm a graduate of that university. And I'm sorry, I know I'm talking too long, but this is so funny. My mother, who was living then, knew me very well. And she knows I'm a troublemaker. So she said, when you go to school, Danita, I want you to do nothing but study and stay out of trouble. Don't be doing that revolutionary stuff that you did in high school. So I agreed that I wouldn't do that. And as soon as I got off the bus, the first day, somebody handed me a pamphlet at UVA and said, we're going to be protesting at the president's house. Come on. And guess what I did? That evening, I told the first lie I think I ever really told my mother. She called me, and this is when we had payphones in the dorm. She said, Danita, were you a part of that rabble-rousing that went on? And I said, no, Mama. And just at that moment, somebody handed me a copy of the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and my picture was right on the front page. A mother, even in transition, knows her daughter. So I tell that because it's to remind me of that. My ancestors know who I am. And they love me for who I am. And when I keep that communication open, it gives me solace that I can't get anywhere else. So that's my process.
All right. Really think this is an incredibly important question. And it is the kind of question of self-examination that we really all should undergo. I just attended a meeting in which we agreed we were going to bring in somebody from the Community Healing Network or the Association of Black Psychiatrists or Association of Black Psychologists, simply because there is a lot of pain and trauma that we carry, and sometimes not consciously. So I remember Katrina, working on Katrina, and I was working with some folks to get assistance to the people who were trying to provide, relief and various services. And it dawned on me, they got to be, seeing all this death and destruction, they got to be hurting. So who heals them? Who do they go to? Let me just say, in terms of my own life's work, number one, I see this as a mission, because it comes out of an experience of living in the Hill District of Pittsburgh, August Wilson's Pittsburgh, actually, lower part, because the upper hill was better off than the lower part, and I was down in the lower part. But it was my mother and father, divorced, unfortunately, and my mother, just incredibly strong woman trying to raise children in very difficult circumstances. And we were poor. The rats, the roaches. We had a non-aggression pact with the rats and roaches. Some of y'all know about that, right? Yeah. And so one night I sort of stepped out and I just said, human beings ought not to live like this. And so I've always seen it almost like an anointing, really. Sometimes when I speak, people call me reverend and all that, and I say, no, I'm not a reverend, but I do think it is a mission that I've been called to do. But it is very challenging. So that's on my mother's side. But on my father's side, he was a griot, and we went through the South, to the South. When you start talking about that ice cream, I remember that. It's a part of this mission. Because every year we would go from Youngstown, Ohio, for 13 years, we would go to the South and go across the Mason-Dixon line and see how the world changed when we crossed the Mason-Dixon line. My father with a blue steel 38 Smith & Wesson up under the back seat. And, seeing the humiliation of having to ask, do you serve colored people here or not? But equally important, him taking us to a tree where one of our family members was lynched and showing us that. And he was a staunch member of the NAACP, my father was, an admirer of that, and talked about also the people who fought back. But he also talked about where Grandpa Dave Daniel was buried in Mutual Aid Cemetery. Mutual Aid Cemetery. He talked about how the black people gathered themselves and how they put their nickels together and dimes together to create little insurance companies. And later, when I did my studies, I understood that there was a direct line between that and the work of the Free Africa Society. That's where that came from. That's where that came from. And so for me, it is a communion with my ancestors. I'm in communion with my ancestors. Haven't been in the last couple of years, I used to go, for 20-something years, I'd go to Selma every year. Because when I go across that bridge, the Edmund Petty Bridge, I can feel the ancestors. I can feel what they're going through. And what that says to me is I have to be about the business. But on the other hand, it seems to me that a part of that, it is the doing which is also therapeutic. Not to do would probably be damaging to me in terms of my health. But because I know and I do and I act, I believe the activism is good for my health. I'm blessed to have just celebrated my 80th birthday on April 26th. And I ain't no ways tired, I'm lying. But I have come this far by faith. Amen. But on the personal level, that also means self-care. I exercise every morning. Every morning I exercise. Every day I try to watch my diet. I cheat a little bit, but I start out pretty good with my fruits and vegetables and that kind of stuff. But I love oatmeal raisin cookies too much and stuff like that. But I try to think about what does it mean to have healthy living? And I absolutely, because people say, well, Brother Ron, my wife and partner and I, we take breaks. I'm looking forward right now. I can sustain myself because we got a little fractional time in Costa Rica. On August 14th through the 21st, we taking 18 family members and we going to Costa Rica. Because you need a break. You need to be able to breathe. You need self-care as a part of the process. And so I try to do all of those things. I try to do as I'm taking on this mission because it is a daunting mission. It is one, I'm tearing up now. And the tears are not so much because of pain, because it's also tears of joy. The joy of being able to be on this mission. And that's why my book, by the way, which our book is called Still on This Journey, The Vision and Mission of Dr. Ron Daniels, I'm still on this journey. And I intend to be until we see what the end is going to be.
I'll just echo a lot of what my fellow panelists have already said. The connection to family, the connection to community, and just remembering why this is important, why one gets involved in this in the first place. And one of the ways that has I've been reminded of that in this work is that there have been several times where my own personal family history and genealogy has kind of intersected with the work with the research at VTS. And I'm not, to my knowledge, yet have not been identified as one of those descendants, but I have, there are these, 1 or 2 degrees of separation where there are people that are in my family by marriage, so I'm not, by blood related to them, but they are, potentially, or people that are related to them are potentially a part of the program. And so there's just all these degrees of separation that happen that remind me of, that I may not be in this particular program, but this is all about my community and my history and maintaining that connection and the sacredness of it that the other panelists have talked about is incredibly important. So I think about it in terms of connection to the heritage, but then also what you were saying, Dr. Daniels, about the disconnect with just the daily grind of doing the work and needing to make sure that you take care of yourself and that you exercise, that you see spiritual director, therapist, whoever it is that you need to see, and I do both. I do therapy, I do spiritual direction, all of those things that help you to define those good boundaries and be able really to, at times, just shut it off, because you can be so much in your head all the time and in your feelings and in your head. And there are times when you just need to be active and exercise and do those things that take you to a different place that allow you to come back and, fight on another day. And I do just want to say that I hope the work that I am doing now will allow me to reach the age of 80 and have as much energy and excitement and passion as you do, Dr. Daniel. So you are an inspiration.
Thank you. So I'm going to invite Reverend Kim to close us out as we are just about at our time. Did you have a question? Do we have one question? We can do, okay. 2 questions? We have time. Okay, well, come get in line.
Yes, for Dr. Daniel. I wanted to hear how you felt.
Can you use the mic so everyone on Zoom can also?
Just turn it. Dr. Daniels, I wanted to hear your opinion in terms of something that happened out in our neighborhood just this past weekend, and that's the return of Bruce Beach, or Bruce Beach out in Manhattan Beach out in California, we were talking about, the tie-in or the disconnect that some are trying to make between that and reparations, in that obviously it took place in the early 20th century, and yet there are so many that are basically either trying to link or in some cases disconnect that from the reparations. So I wanted to hear your opinion in terms of that transaction that's going on right now.
Yeah, I think that is, some of you are aware that the Manhattan Beach is was a place, and we have so many of these, and that's really what is so good about this period, but it's also so painful about this period. And I say that because I have been sometimes guilty of, we talk about buying black and working, doing this stuff, and sometimes we forget we've been there and done that. I mean, we have tried, we have built prosperous communities, and they've been destroyed by one means or another. It's not always been physically, it's been through policies. And Manhattan Beach is an example of that, where people were systematically excluded from their properties. I'm not going to give the exact details, but they were deprived of the property for decades and decades and decades. And the question becomes, here's the question becomes, same thing with Black Wall Street, because they had hotels, they had all kind of stuff there. What would that center, because it was a center for entertainment. It had I think probably had a hotel, or at least had a resort there. What would have, there's no guarantee, businesses come and fail. But what if it succeeded? Would that be the equivalent of, what's the one that's in the Caribbean now? The big old record, you see what I'm saying? Yes, you see what I'm saying? And so, even though today, and they went through a process with the commission, and they studied it, and the land has been returned, as I understand it. I don't know whether there was any compensation or not. You can help me clarify that. But the land has been returned. But the issue still becomes the loss. And I would hope that there will be some process by which there can be some additional compensation, so they can help at least build out that process, because that could well have been that could have been a Hilton, that could have been a Hyatt, that could have been any of those things. But it is a part of the reparatory process. It is the awareness, the apology, the effort then to return the land, and hopefully, and I don't know all the details of it, but hopefully there will also be some resources available to also help them build it out in order to return it to some possibilities of then being another site for black people, because we don't have many across the country. We have some. But the era has outgrown us. The sort of the monopolization and conglomerization makes it more difficult now to start an individual hotel. You see what I'm saying? It's harder because you got chains and so forth working out. But that is, I think, is an example that is an example of how repair can do. So some people say, well, it's not because it was back ancient and whatever, but it doesn't. There's no statute of limitations on injuries that have been occurred, and they can be repaired at any time and ought to be repaired at any time. And so that is one example of at least an effort that has been made. And indeed, California is going to be very interesting. They're having some debates and all of that, but they've issued a 500-page report that lays out injuries. And even though there's been some debate about the lineage aspect of it, it's almost the report defies the lineage argument, because there's so much that says that needs to be repaired. It's going to be interesting to see just how the legislature moves in terms of the repair of those injuries that were inflicted there in California.
You did.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Listen, I was in the British Army. I don't need the mic. See? Yeah. Okay. Good, that's better. Can you hear me now? Good. Morning. Dr. Daniels, I heard you yesterday when you were talking about the reparations here. I know Sir Hilary Beckers came here. I'm from Barbados. And I hope the two, both Sir Hilary and you guys are working together where this reparation is concerned, because we had the same thing in the Caribbean with the English, and Sir Hilary was very staunch, and I must give him a lot of kudos. He is not afraid, and he went forward to England and Europe and the others that had done the people in the Caribbean wrong, and in reference to this reparation. And I'm glad to see both you and the others from the Caribbean working together on this issue. And this rector, sorry, I don't got your name, Hill. Mr. Reverend Hill. When you talk about that ice cream stirring, remember when the slave ship came through the Caribbean, that dropped some of my ancestors there as well as some of yours. And let me tell you something, as a young lad, this is something that we did every Sunday after Sunday school. To stir that, I forgot the name of it now, and as Sir Hilary said, I just turned 80 last November myself. So I'm in your league, all right? And from a young lad growing up in the Caribbean, we used to listen. We only had one radio in our home. And that was the radio. We listened to what was going on here in this country with our brothers and sisters, and all the indignantness that was thrown on the black people here in America. And I said, if I ever get to America, there's one thing I want to do was to get involved in civil rights, which I am. As you see, I never leave home if I'm my NAACP cap. And I'm doing it now 24 years as a local branch president in Long Island, New York. So again, I must thank you guys for the fight you put up here. And that's the reason I could stand here today, because of you all. Thank you very much.
I wanted to say that we work very closely with Professor Sir Hilary Beckles. I mentioned his name yesterday. I asked people to Google him. He is, to me, the leading public intellectual on this issue today. He is we would say, they call it the vice chancellor. I would just simply call it the president of the University of the West Indies.
Yes, he is.
But he's also the chairperson of the Caribbean Reparations Commission. But more important than that, he is one of the most brilliant scholars on the stage today. But here's what makes him powerful. It's what everybody up here has been talking about. He is an incredible storyteller.
You're right.
He tells us, by the time he gets finished, I mean, he just makes it so clear. He takes the evidence and the scholarship and he combines it in a very powerful way. The other thing I want to say, you're from Barbados?
Yes.
You're Prime Minister. Maya Motley. Maya Motley is leading the charge. She's the first, she is leading the charge, Maya Motley. In fact, I could show you my phone right now. No, I'm serious.
I know.
I'm going to a summit in Accra, Ghana. She could not make it directly, and some of you know David Commission, right? You know him, right? And you know, and when I go, like, forgive me, I got to tell the story now. My wife and I also do cruises.
You're right.
But guess what my cruises are like? When I cruise the Caribbean, I stop in Barbados. And we don't go on a tour, we go to see David Commission. And there's a famous lawyer there, I forget his name now, he was a legendary lawyer, and we go and have lunch with him, and I go island to island that way. So Maya Motley is leading the charge. The other thing I want to say is Don Rojas, who will be here this afternoon, who's going to be on the program. along with me and Dr. Turner. By way of introduction, because and we want you to pray for him, by the way. Don Rojas, those of you who are familiar with the People's Revolutionary Government in Grenada, you know Maurice Bishop.
Yes.
Don Rojas was the press secretary for Maurice Bishop. He is a genuine, one of the great revolutionaries of our time. He is the director of communication and international relations for the Institute of the Black World 21st Century. And he is the one this afternoon who will be talking about the connection with CARICOM. He'll be talking about what's happening throughout the globe. And let me just quickly say, by the way, the other thing, I just going to mention this the other day. In Colombia and in Costa Rica, various other places, but particularly in Colombia, one of the things that the brutality against Afro-descendants in Colombia has been horrific. Colombia has 15 million black people are in Colombia. Largest other than Brazil. The revolutionary forces and the FARC who fought, put down their arms, went into the political process, ran for president twice. They lost, but they just won in Colombia. And guess who's going to be vice president? An African woman will be vice president of Colombia. And guess what's on their agenda? Reparations is one of the key issues on their agenda, right? So I was going to say, I got right here, Maya Motley talking points, right here on my phone right now. I got to go get on the computer and look at the talking points that she's going to be presenting in Accra, Ghana.
Thank you.
Appreciate you, my brother. NAACP.
All right, we'll have our last question.
Mine is not so much a question, but a comment. For those of us, and I've been around almost as long as you have, so I'll be 76 this year, and an Episcopalian all my life, 3 generations of us. What I think is happening is one of the things that we leave out is that reparations includes recognition and remembrance. And we can't always work on the big stage. And for those of us, I did work on the big stage when I was younger. I had to step aside because I found myself, and I have trouble with sacred ground, because I can't sit there and keep my mouth shut when I should. It's just not in my nature. But those of us who see and know, we need to start talking about our own families and the connections that our families have and the connections that the young members of our families need to know. When the civil rights was booming, I was told what happened before me. We're not doing that. And so they're not joining you because we're not going to be here that long. You know, we could fall out tomorrow and those connections will be gone. We need to bring them along. And so my job, and I think some of the jobs of people, we need to bring those stories, those recognitions, those remembrances to the young people that we're working with in the church and the young people we're working with in our families, to make sure that they know, you know, there's something going big in my family. There's a little teeny place called Dubuque, Iowa. And people don't think about black people being in Iowa. But guess what? In 2 weeks, at the airport, the building is going to be named after my uncle, who was a Tuskegee Airman, who was born and raised in Iowa. My grandfather raised 9 children in Iowa. They all went to college, and 2 of them were engineers, and this one, Robert Martin, the The airport will not be named for him, but the building at the airport will be named for him. And so I'm chugging out there, all his nieces and nephews. So on the 19th, Google. But those are the people that need to know. The kids in my family, their kids, their friends. We're not doing enough, but because I think reparations also talks about recognition and remembrance. And that's the most important thing that we can do for the people that we reach. It doesn't have to be a big deal, it has to be a deal.
I wanted to quickly say, I left a quick point out real quick when I was talking about Don Rojas, because I was saying that I wanted you to pray for him, but I didn't say why. This brilliant revolutionary is also suffering from multiple myeloma. Yes, I always have difficulty saying that. Bone cancer and so forth. He was supposed to have died 3-4 years ago. We prayed him back from death's doorstep. And some of you know the Reverend Herbert Daughtry from New York, and we had a program from him there, and then he just asked God and the ancestors for just 10 more years so he could be about the struggle. And I think the Lord has been giving him that. So when I say that, I'm saying just in your own way, continue to pray for him, because he just keeps going, he keeps fighting, and I think he's alive because this work is keeping him alive. So I just wanted to say that.
Amen. Thank you very much. And let's give our panelists a big hand for and I remind you, you have received a foretaste of the great banquet that is yet to come this afternoon in the workshops that they will be leading. So we thank you very much, each and every one of you, for your wonderful, inspiring, powerful, and prophetic messages that you have delivered to us today as we find our place in the work for reparations. Also want to take a brief moment just to look at our schedule. We're going to have a lunch immediately following the closing of this session where Deacon Linda will lead us in grace. And that's going to be over in the Harbor View where our reception was yesterday. So you're just going to wander out and cut across, and lunch will be ready there for us at 12:30. Also, we want you to please enjoy that lunch within 45 minutes so that you can come back for a special presentation. Aren't these magnificent? Display in front of us, these quilts and the signage that we have. We're going to have the Reverend Carol Burnside from the Diocese of Maryland back here at 1:15 to give you the story behind the quilts that you're seeing. Anybody who was at worship at St. James on Sunday, if you looked behind you or as you were leaving, you saw 2 hanging quilt banners that she had also made. If I recall correctly, one depicted Bishop Curry, and the other was the St. James banner. Thank you very much, Dean Sandy. And so those are just spectacular works, and we want to hear the story behind the creation that was here. That's 1:15. Then our workshops will begin. The majority of them are on this second floor. If you do not have a schedule of the location, there are extra copies that are outside on a table as you enter this area. Please pick it up so you can go to the right room. Workshops are being offered twice so that you pick one for the first hour, another for the second. The only person that you have not met is Mr. Gerald Delk, who is going to be speaking to us from Church Pension Group, one of our wonderful partners in ministry for many, many years. They're slated to receive the Exemplary Ally Award this tomorrow evening. Anyway, Mr. Delk and also Dean Sandy Wilson will be talking to us about the pension program's clergy benefits. Get yourself ready for retirement. The day does come, okay? The day does come. It may not be soon. Yes. Yes. So for some of us already here, okay? But anyway, please, those offerings, both in the early afternoon and later afternoon, they will precede our worship experience. Again, clergy, if you want to participate in the procession, bring a stole or not. It doesn't matter. The worship begins at 4:30 today, and we'll line up for those in the procession in the same place as yesterday, over off to my, in the direction that I'm currently pointing. All right? Your right, my left. Okay. Thank you. Deacon Linda has 2 more announcements, Grace, and then we're off to lunch. God bless.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you. My 2 announcements are that if you are a Tuesday-only individual and not staying at the hotel, I have parking passes for you, so you need to see me. I don't think you can miss me at all. I'm around like that. And also, people have been asking about the T-shirts. There are extra T-shirts. We're not asking you to pay for the T-shirts. You will be making a donation for the T-shirts. Okay? We have to be very careful about this, all right? And once again, it's a pleasure to have all of you here, but let us pray, okay? Okay. Gracious God, we thank you for the food for which we are about to receive, for the nourishment of our bodies for Christ's sake. Amen. Amen.